Montana Territory, August 1878. The sun had just dipped behind the Bitterroot Mountains when Loretta Whitlow stumbled into the clearing, her dress torn at the hem and dust clinging to her boots. Her breath came in short gasps, heart thudding like a drum against her ribs. Somewhere behind her, the sheriff's posse was cutting through the pines, their voices distant but drawing closer. She ducked behind a fallen log, the bark rough against her palm, and pressed herself low. The forest was thick here, the brush tangled, but it would not hide her long. Not from Sheriff Harrow, not from the law she had never meant to break. A twig snapped nearby. Loretta's fingers tightened around the small satchel at her side. She had not eaten since morning, and her legs trembled not only from hunger, but from fear. "Easy now," a man's voice said low behind her. "If you move sudden, I will draw." She turned her head slowly. He stood 10 feet away, half shadowed by the trees, a rifle resting in his calloused hands. A wide-brimmed hat sat low over his brow, and his eyes dark as smoldering coals were locked on hers. He looked about 30, lean and broad-shouldered, with the quiet steadiness of a man who had spent years riding alone. "I am not armed," Loretta said, her voice rough from dust. He stepped closer, boots silent on the pine needles. "You running from someone? You could say that." He studied her tangled braid, the bruises along her wrist. Then he lowered the rifle without a word and offered her his hand. "I am Dane Ellard," he said. "There is a cabin half a mile off. You can rest there." She hesitated. "I do not turn folks in," he added. Loretta took his hand. The cabin was small but solid, tucked between the trees where no path led. Inside, a fire crackled low. A kettle hung over it, and a bedroll lay tucked in the corner. Dane handed her a tin cup of water, then sat across from her on a wooden stool, watching her as if waiting to hear the truth. "I did not kill him," she said after a long silence. "But the sheriff thinks I did." Dane did not flinch. "Who?" "My husband, Thomas. We were married 2 years. He was cruel. Drank too much. Hit me worse when the bottle was empty. I left once before, but he found me. Last week he was drunk again. I fought back." She looked down at her hands. "Next morning he was gone. They found his body near the river. Shot once, clean through the chest. And you ran." "The sheriff never liked me. Said I was too proud for a woman. Said I thought myself better than the law, leaving my husband like that." "You did what you had to." She raised her eyes to his. "Why would you say that?" Dane leaned back, his voice quiet. "Because I had a sister once. She did not get the chance to run." Loretta swallowed hard. The silence between them was heavy, but not cold. "You can stay tonight," Dane said. "They will not find you here." She hesitated, then nodded. He rose and laid an extra blanket near the fire. As he turned away, she said, "Why are you out here alone?" He paused. "Let us just say I do not belong in town either." Loretta lay down with her back to the fire, listening to the wind in the trees. Her body ached, but sleep did not come. Not until she heard his voice, low and certain, from the other side of the room. "You are safe with me tonight." She closed her eyes. In the morning, the sun filtered through the slats in the roof. Dane was already outside splitting wood. Loretta stepped out barefoot, her dress clean now, her hair pulled back. "You do not talk much," she said. "I talk when I have something worth saying." She smiled faintly. "You are not what I expected." He looked up at her, sweat glinting on his brow. "Neither are you." Later, while Dane was out checking the trapline, Loretta sat by the fire, turning his words over in her mind. He had not asked questions, had not judged. He had only seen her, really seen her, and stayed. That night they shared a meal of rabbit stew, and she laughed for the first time in weeks. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I do not know," she said. "I have no family left, no money, just a name that will get me locked up." "You could stay here," Dane said. His voice was soft, but there was something behind it. For a little while, she looked at him across the fire. "You would let me?" He nodded once. "You need time. I got no one else needing this place but me." Loretta felt something warm stir in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of it. Trust, maybe, or something close. She stayed. By the end of the week, the bruises on her arm had faded, and her hands had calluses from chopping wood. She helped him repair the fence, cook meals, patch the roof. They spoke more now, quiet words, sometimes teasing, sometimes thoughtful. She learned that Dane had once driven cattle clear from Texas, that he had fought in the war and come west to forget it, that he liked silence but not loneliness. And she told him about her mother's garden, and the horse she had once dreamed of owning, and how she used to read by candlelight after her husband had gone to sleep. One night, as rain pattered against the roof, she sat beside him on the porch. He handed her a cup of coffee, and their hands touched. "I am not who I was," she said. He looked at her with something steady and kind in his eyes. "Neither am I." They did not speak more that night, but when he stood, he helped her up and did not let go of her hand. She felt it then that something between them had changed. Not loudly, not quickly, but real. The next morning, Dane came back from the river with news. "They are looking closer now," he said. "Sheriff Harrow rode past the ridge with 2 men. They will not stop." Loretta's heart sank. "Then I should leave. Or," he said, "we find another way." She frowned. "What way?" But he only shook his head. "Give me a day." That night she could not sleep. She stood at the window watching the trees. Dane came to stand beside her. "You should have never had to run," he said. She turned to him. "You believe me, even without proof." "I see the truth in your eyes, Loretta." He reached out and touched her cheek. She leaned into him before she could second-guess it. His lips brushed hers, gentle, certain. Her hands clutched his shirt, grounding herself. When they pulled apart, she was breathless, but not afraid. "I should not have done that," she whispered. "I wanted to," he said. "For a while now." She looked up at him and said, "So did I." He kissed her again, and this time, she kissed him back like she meant it, because she did. And for the first time in a long, long while, Loretta Whitlow felt something she had not known she still could. Safe. Dane didn't come back that night. Loretta waited until the fire turned to ash and the crickets had quieted in the trees. She sat by the shuttered window, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, listening for hoofbeats that never came. When the sky paled with morning, she stepped out to the porch and watched the ridgeline, lips parted against the stillness. By mid-morning, she saddled the mule he'd left tied near the shed and followed the narrow trail south. There were no signs of struggle along the path, no broken branches, no scuffed prints leading off. Just tracks headed toward the old mining road, a route she hadn't dared take before. She followed carefully, scanning the brush for movement. 2 hours on, the trees thinned, and she caught sight of a figure kneeling beside a creek. Dane. He was bent low, arms elbow deep in the water, pulling something wrapped in oilskin from beneath a cluster of stones. She stayed quiet until he rose. "You went alone?" Her voice carried across the clearing. He turned, startled, then straightened. "I didn't want you following. You left without saying a word." "There was no time. I needed to get something." He crossed to her, the bundle under his arm dark with river water. When she reached for it, he handed it over. Inside was a worn ledger and a sealed envelope tied with twine. "My father's papers," he said. He had a land claim out near Miles City. Abandoned it after the war. I kept the deed in case I ever needed to start clean. She looked up. You're leaving? No. I'm offering you a choice. Dane's eyes didn't waver. We stay here, they find you eventually. Or we ride east. File this claim and make it ours. Ours? He nodded, slow and steady. If you want that. Loretta traced the edge of the envelope with her thumb. I don't even know what I'd do with land. You'd build a new name, he said. One that belongs to you. They camped that night near the water, the fire low and damp from wood that hadn't fully dried. Dane didn't press her for an answer, and she didn't offer one. But when he lay down, she moved her bedroll beside his. She whispered into the dark, I don't know how to start again. He reached for her hand. You won't be doing it alone. The next morning they packed light. Dane buried the rest of his tools under a sheet of canvas near the root cellar. If we ever come back, he said, tying the last strap on her saddle. She mounted, legs still sore from the unfamiliar weight of travel, but she didn't complain. Dane rode ahead, rifle slung over his back, scanning the trail. They avoided the main road, cutting across a series of ridges where the pines grew thick and the ground was soft with needles. By dusk, they'd covered 15 miles. Loretta didn't speak much, but she watched him how he leaned forward when they descended, how he checked her mount's girth without asking, how he kept her on the inside of the trail when the ledge narrowed. That night, they stopped near a dry ravine. Dane built a small fire with care, shielding the flame with a ring of stones. While she warmed her hands, he tore a strip of jerky and handed it to her. Did your father ever return to his land? She asked. No. He died near Chattanooga. Bullet to the back. We never found out who. She chewed slowly. And your mother? Gone before the war. I was 15. Loretta nodded once. You've been on your own a long time. So have you. They didn't speak more after that. The wind picked up sometime after midnight, and she woke to find Dane adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. He didn't know she was awake, and she didn't let on. The next day brought rain. Not a hard downpour, but the kind that soaked in slow, steady. The trail turned to clay beneath them, and their mounts slipped more than once. Still, they pressed on. Dane didn't complain, and neither did she. By afternoon, the land began to flatten. Wide grasslands stretched ahead, dotted with cottonwoods and the distant shimmer of water. Dane stopped at the crest of a rise, pointing toward the east. That's where it is, he said. The old boundary post should still be standing. She followed his gaze. There was nothing but open land, but something in his voice made her believe him. They reached the post by sundown. A single cedar stake, half rotted, marked the edge of the claim. Dane dismounted and knelt beside it, brushing away the weeds. It's not much yet, he said, but it's ours if you want it. Loretta stared at the horizon. Wind tugged at her braid, the scent of wet earth rising around them. I want it, she said. He rose and stepped closer. Then we start here. She turned to him slowly. What if they still come for me? Then they'll find two people standing together. They didn't kiss. Not then. But she rested her head against his chest, and his arms came around her like they'd always belonged there. The wind moved through the grass in waves, and for the first time, she didn't flinch at its sound. The days that followed settled into quiet rhythm. With the deed filed under Dane's name and no questions asked at the Miles City Land office, they began the slow work of carving a home out of the tall grass and clay soil. Loretta wore Dane's old canvas shirt over her own dress as she cleared brush, sleeves rolled and forearms streaked with dirt. Her palms blistered, then hardened. She didn't complain. Dane built a frame for a one-room cabin using timber from a nearby grove, hauling each beam by hand with a rope strung across his chest. Loretta measured and cut the chinking moss with a bone-handled knife he'd given her. The work was slow, but it filled the space between them with something solid, a kind of trust that needed no words. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in rust and gold, Loretta stood at the edge of the field, watching a hawk wheel above the cottonwoods. Dane approached with 2 tin mugs, one held out to her. "It's chicory," he said. "Closest I could find." She took a sip, winced slightly, then drank again. "Tastes like burnt twine." He chuckled once, the sound brief and low. "Better than nothing." She looked at him then, her voice quiet. "You ever think about what comes after this?" "Every day." "What do you see?" He hesitated, then answered, "A stove that doesn't smoke when the wind shifts, a fence that holds, a roof that keeps out the rain. And me." His eyes softened. "You're all I see." She didn't say anything right away. Her hand found his and held it, fingers laced. The hawk circled once more, then vanished behind the trees. That night, she lay beside him on the bedroll, their bodies close but not tangled. Rain tapped against the oilcloth stretched over the cabin's half-built frame. She listened to his breathing, slow and steady. "Does it ever feel real to you?" she asked. "It does now." She turned her face to his chest, her voice no louder than the rain. "I think I stopped believing I could have anything quiet, anything good." Dane didn't speak, just drew her closer until her cheek rested against his collarbone. Morning brought crisp air and a sky so wide it made her feel small. They worked without talking, side by side, until she paused and shaded her eyes. A rider was coming from the west, a single figure on a chestnut horse, moving steady but slow. Loretta felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Dane stepped in front of her without a word, rifle already in hand but lowered. As the rider neared, they saw it was a woman older, dressed in a weather-worn skirt and riding astride like a man. Her gray braid hung over one shoulder, and her eyes were sharp beneath a brimmed hat. She reined in and tipped her head. "Name's Cora Bexley. I've got a homestead 3 miles east. Saw smoke. Thought I'd come see who moved in." Dane nodded once. "Dane Ellard." "This is Loretta." Cora looked from one to the other and said, "You built all this yourselves?" "Working on it," Loretta said. Cora studied her a moment longer. "You're not running cattle?" "No," Dane said. "Just trying to live quiet." Cora dismounted and tied her horse to a sapling. "Well, I brought sourdough starter. Figured if you didn't have it, you'd want it. If you did, you'd say thank you and I'd ride home." Loretta took the jar with both hands. "Thank you." Cora gave a small nod, then glanced at the half-finished roof. "You'll want to brace that crossbeam before the next wind. I can send my boys over if you need muscle." "We'll manage," Dane said. Cora mounted again and turned her horse. "You've got good land here, but it's lonely country. Neighbors matter." As she rode off, Loretta looked at Dane. "Think she suspects? She's not the law." "No," Loretta said, "but she's watching." They worked faster after that. The walls went up in 3 more days, and Dane carved a latch from pine for the door. Loretta patched a quilt from old flour sacks and lined the window with it to keep the dust out. There were no curtains, no shelves yet, but the place held warmth. One night, she came in from gathering firewood to find a small package wrapped in oilcloth on the table. Inside was a tin brooch shaped like a feather. "I saw it in town," Dane said. "Didn't know if you'd want it." Her fingers trembled slightly as she pinned it to her collar. "It's the first thing anyone's ever given me without expecting something back." "I don't expect anything." "I know." She stepped close and pressed her mouth to his, slow and sure. He kissed her like he meant to stay, hands steady on her back. There was no rush, only the quiet certainty of 2 people who'd come through fire and found each other on the far side. Later, by the fire, Loretta leaned against him and said, "I'm not afraid anymore." "Good," Dane said. "You never should have had to be." The wind rose outside, and the cabin held. The roof didn't leak. The latch stayed shut. And for the first time, peace wasn't something she borrowed. It was something they'd built. The first frost came early. Dane stepped out one morning to find the grass rimed in silver, the water barrel stiff with ice along its edges. He stood quietly for a moment, watching his breath curl into the pale air, then turned back toward the cabin, boots crunching through brittle stems. Inside, Loretta had already stoked the fire back to life. She crouched by the hearth, coaxing flame from half-dry pine cones, her braid tucked into the collar of her coat. When he entered, she glanced over her shoulder, eyes still soft from sleep. "Ground stiff," he said, setting down his gloves. "We'll have to bring the root cellar in before the next hard freeze." She nodded and stood, brushing soot from her palms. "I can start clearing the trench after breakfast. I'll take the north end. It'll go faster with both of us." They worked until midday, breaking earth with spades and hauling stones from the creek bank to line the pit. Loretta's hands ached, but she didn't slow. Dane noticed but said nothing. He only passed her a strip of cloth to wrap her fingers and kept digging. Later, while they sat on overturned crates to eat cold beans from a tin, she asked, "You ever have to winter alone before?" "Once," he said, "down near Fort Peck. Snow came so heavy it buried the door halfway up." "What did you do?" "Waited it out. Burned every fence board I had." She smiled faintly. "Let's not let it come to that." "We won't." That afternoon, a wagon creaked up the eastern ridge, drawn by 2 mules with shaggy coats and a gait that sagged with age. Cora Bexley held the reins, her 2 sons seated behind her, both tall and broad in the shoulders, with the plain, tired look of men who'd worked their way through every season without ever leaving the county. "Brought the seed potatoes," Cora called, pulling up near the stump where Dane had split kindling the week before, "and some onions from last harvest. They'll keep better with yours than mine." Loretta stepped forward, brushing damp hair from her brow. "We haven't got much to trade." "You've got hands," Cora said. "That'll do." Her sons carried the sacks into the cabin without a word and left them by the wall. On their way out, the younger one, Sam, paused beside Loretta. "You used to be in Dawson Gulch," he said, not quite a question. Dane moved forward, but Loretta held his gaze. Briefly, Sam looked like he might say more, but his mother called to him and he turned, boots thudding across the yard. Once they were gone, Dane asked, "Want me to ride into town and see what he knows?" "No," Loretta said. "If they were going to turn me in, they'd have done it already." He studied her expression. "You sure?" She nodded, then leaned back against the cabin wall. "Let's just keep building this place. That's all I need." That night, the wind rose again, and dry branches scraped the eaves. Loretta lay awake, eyes on the ceiling, listening to the creak of logs settling in the corners. Dane reached over and tucked the blanket higher across her shoulder. "You thinking about Sam?" he asked. "No. I'm thinking about how long it's been since I felt like I had a right to anything." "You do." She turned toward him, her voice low. "I know that now, but I didn't before." He didn't answer with words. He simply took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers beneath the blanket, and she held on. By the next week, the root cellar was finished, and they'd moved the food stores inside. Dane carved a small shelf from scrap pine and nailed it above the doorframe. Loretta placed a folded scrap of muslin on it, a keepsake from her mother's sewing box, the only thing she'd taken with her when she fled. They didn't talk about the past anymore, not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer held them still. One morning, a letter arrived, brought by a trapper passing west. He handed it to Dane without knowing his name, just a nod and the word from Miles City. The envelope was rough, the writing slanted and smudged. Loretta opened it by the fire, her hands steady. She read it twice before folding it once and placing it in the cookstove's ash drawer. "What did it say?" Dane asked. "They found the man who shot Thomas," she said. "It was a gambler he'd owed money to. Confessed in a saloon after 4 whiskeys too many." Dane didn't speak. "They're closing the case," she added. "No more wanted posters. No more questions." He watched her quietly. "You're free now." She shook her head, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I was free the day I met you." He stepped closer and rested his hand on her waist, drawing her in. She reached up, fingers brushing his jaw. "Then it's time we stop looking over our shoulders," he said. She kissed him, slow and sure, and this time it wasn't a promise, it was a beginning. Outside, the sky was wide and clean, the last leaves rustling in the cottonwoods. Winter would be hard. They both knew that, but the cabin was strong. The land was theirs, and they had chosen each other without fear, without debt, without shadow. For Loretta, that was everything. By mid-December, the wind came down hard from the northeast, flattening the grass and icing over the water trough. The cabin creaked at night, joints settling tighter with the cold, but it held firm. Inside, the stove glowed red, and the smell of cornmeal and dried sage filled the room. Loretta had taken to humming while she worked. Not loud, not constant, just small threads of melody, half-remembered from childhood, stitched between stirring the pot and brushing ash from the hearth. Dane noticed, though he never said anything aloud. He just glanced at her more often, longer each time, as if memorizing the sound. One morning, he came in from the barn with a canvas bundle under his arm. Snow clung in clumps to his shoulders, and his cheeks were red with wind. He set the bundle on the table and untied the corners, revealing a bolt of wool, deep blue with faint herringbone lines running through it. Loretta paused where she stood. "Where did you get that?" "Traded with a freight hauler west of Ekalaka. He had more than he needed. I gave him the last of the salted venison and a pair of boot soles I made last fall." She ran her fingers over the cloth, silent. "I thought maybe you'd want to make something for yourself," Dane added. "Or for whatever comes next." She looked up at him. "You thought right." That evening, she took out her mother's old needle kit, the one she'd kept folded inside her travel satchel all this time, and began cutting the wool. Dane watched from the rocker by the fire, whittling a button from elk antler. Neither of them spoke much, but their silence had changed. It wasn't careful anymore. It was easy. On the second day of the new year, a letter arrived tucked into a basket of dried apples left by Cora Bexley's oldest boy, Nathan. He'd ridden up before dawn, left the basket by the door, and didn't wait to be seen. Loretta read the letter alone, standing by the window while the light shifted across the floorboards. When she folded it, her shoulders had gone still. Dane rose from the bench. "Something wrong?" "No," she said. "It's from a woman named Miriam Cutler. She was the wife of the gambler who shot Thomas. Says she wanted me to know she's sorry." "You believe her?" "I think I do." Loretta set the letter aside and walked to the hearth, where embers glowed low and steady. She said something else, too. That her man died last month. Fever took him. She has a child now. No land. No family left. Dane leaned against the wall near the window. "You thinking about bringing her here?" She didn't ask. Loretta's voice came quiet. "But I know what it is to have nowhere." He waited. "If we clear the brush east of the willows," she said, "there's room for another cabin. We'd need to fell more timber. I can help." He crossed the room and touched her cheek. "Then we'll do it." The next week, They began hauling lumber from the creek bend, stacking it near the edge of the clearing. Loretta wrote a short letter and gave it to Nathan to deliver on his next trip into town. She didn't say much, just enough to let Miriam know she'd be welcome if she wanted the chance. Snow deepened in February, and Dane began carving frames for the second cabin. Loretta worked on the wool coat she'd started, hemming sleeves and stitching the seams with close, patient hands. At night, they read from the Psalter Dane's mother had copied by hand during one hard winter, and sometimes they played checkers using wooden pieces Dane had cut and painted with blackberries. One night, as they sat by the fire, Loretta reached for his hand and turned it palm up. "I never expected this," she said. "What part?" "All of it. You." The quiet, waking up without fear. He didn't answer right away, just brushed his thumb along the base of her fingers. "I've been thinking," she said, "if we're going to build something lasting here, we ought to do it right." He looked up. "What do you mean?" "I used to think I'd never want to marry again, that it would feel like a cage. But with you, it's nothing like that." He set aside the checkerboard. "You're not asking," she said, "and you don't have to. But if you did, I'd say yes." Dane stood slowly, then knelt beside her chair, his hand steady as it reached for hers. "Loretta Whitlow," he said, "will you be my wife?" She nodded, eyes wet but smiling. "Yes, I will." They married at the end of March, when the snow had begun to melt into rivulets across the field and the first of the prairie crocus bloomed purple in the thawed soil. Cora Bexley stood witness, along with her sons. Nathan brought a fiddle, and they danced once in the clearing, Loretta's new coat swirling around her boots. Miriam arrived 2 weeks after, her daughter wrapped in a shawl stitched from scraps. She didn't say much at first, but Loretta took her hand and led her inside the second cabin, already nearly done. Dane helped unload their cart, and by evening, the fire was lit in her hearth too. That spring, they planted rows of beans and corn in the tilled field behind the cabins. Miriam tended the garden with Loretta while the baby napped in a basket on the porch. Dane built a smokehouse from pine and stacked it with fresh cured meat. They raised a chicken coop between the two homes and shared the eggs. The land didn't forgive. It never would. The storms still came fast, and the sun could burn a field dry in 2 days. But they didn't ask it to be gentle. They only asked it to be theirs. And it was. Years passed, but nothing frayed between them. Dane carved a cradle when Loretta's belly began to swell, and she painted it with dyes made from onion skins and ash. Their son arrived in the quiet hours before dawn, strong-lunged and red-faced. Dane held him close, then laid him in Loretta's arms, his voice rough with awe. They named him Elias, and he grew up knowing the shape of his mother's laugh and the sure weight of his father's hands guiding his first steps. The grass grew tall again each summer, and the cabins weathered under sun and snow. Loretta stitched new quilts, taught Miriam's daughter to read, and planted birch saplings along the fence line. Dane built a swing from an old wagon axle and hung it beneath the cottonwood. They never left the land, never needed to. And every night, as the fire burned low and the wind moved through the trees, Loretta would lean into Dane's shoulder, her fingers curled against his shirt, and rest their safe, chosen home. Forever.